So what's the answer?
Invest.
What's the answer? Is the answer
Well,
is it quotas?
No. I think that the first and most important thing is that the chairs and of the board and the chair of the nominations committee have to break up the boys' club. They have to say, look, next time we have a vacancy, we're genuinely going to look for talent, whatever shape and whatever package it comes in. We're not going to just look for the kind of guy that we recognize because he's a bit like us. Secondly, they need to think about how they behave. Right. And do they behave in a way that this different kind of person would feel comfortable at the board table? So those are the first two things that have got to happen.
It's simply equipping people with the skills. So what we need is three things from our senior executives. The first is not to be defensive. Yeah, I talk about defensive fragility in individuals on an interpersonal level, but there's also something called corporate defensive fragility, where people are so defensive about what they are currently doing that they can't open their minds to looking at this in a different way. Hence, what happens is that they hold on to this unconscious guilty perpetrator, hapless victim model. So the first thing is to resist this defensiveness. The other thing that we want to do is make a decision to unsubscribe from the guilty perpetrator, hapless victim model. That is, I'm guilty, I need to be constantly looking at ways to improve the life of the poor minority. Now, I know you consciously don't think that, but when you don't equip people with skills to navigate a recognized problem, then you are doing that, consciously or unconsciously. So unsubscribe from the guilty perpetrator, hapless victim model. And you'll find that by doing that, your vision will not be impaired. And you can look at the problem for what it is. And if you can look at the problem for what it is, you can address it. But if you can't look at the problem for what it is, and you can only come from one place, which is a directional place, for example, you're going to find yourself coming unstuck. And it's going to be a long, long wait before we actually address this. And how do I know that? Because we've been trying to address this for the last 40 years with very little success. And we always come back to the same place until something really heinous happens and it gets us to recalibrate our approach. But the problem is when we recalibrate our approach, we're coming from a place of guilty perpetrator, hapless victim model. So we need to unsubscribe from that model. And then the third thing, which I've kind of mentioned, but I think is worth reiterating and clarifying it. We want to stop trying to eradicate bias. An approach which is oriented around navigation is going to have much more success and is going to expedite the pace at which we start to dissipate what we call bias. You can never eradicate it, right? It's immutable. Yeah, if you were a sailor, you wouldn't, or a captain, or of a ship, or of a crew, you wouldn't try and stop the rain. You wouldn't try and stop the wind. You wouldn't try and stop the rough waves, right? You'd recognize that they're there, and you would look to navigate to yourself to your destiny, yourself and your crew to your destination. And unfortunately, bias is exactly the same. And until we are honest about bias in that way, and address it from that perspective, instead of suggesting that people should be reliant on the traditional perpetrator to identify his cognitive or her cognitive shortcuts in decision-making and their behavior, until we stop saying that others have to be reliant on that and understand that there is joint complicity in terms of calling out bias, and equipping people with the skills to do that. Until we do that, we're just going around in circles.